A lonely woman on a quiet road is forced to stop at a dangerous bar full of dangerous men. But when she faces off with their leader, a secret from her past threatens to unravel everything she's worked for. Will she escape, or will the ghosts of her former life finally catch up to her? The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt of the desolate highway. Maria Fuentes tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her battered van as the engine sputtered once more. She sighed, glancing at the blinking fuel gauge. There was no choice but to stop soon, or she'd find herself stranded in the middle of nowhere. A flickering neon sign appeared in the distance announcing Rusty's Bar and Grill in half-lit letters. The parking lot was a graveyard of motorcycles, their gleaming chrome catching the dying light of the day. Maria hesitated but eventually turned into the lot, parking far from the rowdy cluster of bikers gathered near the entrance. Adjusting her scarf, she stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel, and made her way inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with smoke and the scent of stale beer. Conversations halted as Maria entered, the weight of countless eyes falling on her. She moved carefully toward the bar, her weathered leather bag slung over one shoulder. A jukebox in the corner crackled with a country tune, barely audible over the deep laughter and clinking glasses. Maria ordered a coffee from the tired-looking waitress, who offered a fleeting smile before hurrying away. She took a seat at the edge of the bar, trying to blend into the shadows, but the atmosphere made it clear this was no place for strangers. She could feel the sharp gazes of the patrons, particularly from a loud group in the corner. "Whose grandma lost her way?" a booming voice called out, followed by roaring laughter. Maria's grip tightened on her mug, but she didn't turn. She wasn't here to cause trouble, just to rest and refuel before continuing her journey. The group in the corner, led by a burly man with a shaved head and a leather vest labeled Jake Thunder, seemed to thrive on attention. Jake's booming laughter echoed across the room as he watched Maria. She kept her gaze fixed forward, willing herself to remain unnoticed. A heavy-set man from Jake's group sauntered over, leaning against the bar beside her. "Hey lady, you lost or something?" he sneered. Maria calmly sipped her coffee, ignoring him, but her heart beat faster. She'd seen places like this before, places where quiet strength wasn't enough to avoid confrontation. The waitress returned with a hurried whisper, "You should leave while you can." Maria gave a small nod of thanks but didn't move just yet. She needed a moment to think, to decide her next step. As Jake and his crew erupted into another round of rowdy jeers, Maria realized she might not have the luxury of avoiding trouble tonight. Maria kept her focus on the coffee in her hands, the faint steam rising as she blew on it softly. The murmurs of the bar grew louder, and she could feel the tension thickening like a storm about to break. Jake Thunder leaned back in his chair, his boots propped arrogantly on the table, a smirk spreading across his face as he observed her. "Looks like Grandma's too good to talk to us," Jake barked, loud enough to silence the other conversations. His posse erupted in laughter, their voices ringing through the smoky room. Maria inhaled deeply but didn't respond. Her silence only seemed to fuel their amusement. One of the younger bikers, with a tattoo of a snake winding down his neck, swaggered over to her. He grabbed the edge of her bag, tugging at it lightly. "Let's see what she's got in here," he said, his tone mockingly curious. Maria's hand shot out instinctively, gripping the strap of the bag before he could pull it away. She locked eyes with him, her expression calm but unyielding. For a moment, the biker froze, surprised by her firm reaction. Then, with a derisive snort, he let go and walked back to the group. "She's got some fight in her," Jake said, standing up and stretching his arms. He approached her slowly, the bar creaking under his heavy boots. The room grew quieter, the other patrons now watching the unfolding scene with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Maria set her mug down deliberately and stood, her movements measured. Jake loomed over her, a mountain of a man with a sneer that promised trouble. "Lady, you must be lost," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "This ain't a place for someone like you." The moment hung in the air like a drawn breath, and just when Maria thought she might be able to defuse the situation, another man lunged toward her from the side. His move was clumsy but sudden, aimed to intimidate. Maria reacted on instinct. In a blur of motion, she twisted his arm and sent him sprawling to the floor, his cry of pain echoing through the room. The bar fell into stunned silence. Even Jake seemed taken aback, his smirk fading for a moment. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, glaring down at his companion who was now groaning on the floor. "What the hell just happened?" Maria adjusted her scarf and stepped back, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wasn't about to let herself be a target either. Jake's smirk returned, though now tinged with a sharper edge. "All right, Grandma," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now you've got my attention." The air in the bar seemed to crackle with tension as Maria stood her ground. The collective gaze of the patrons bore down on her, and whispers began to ripple through the room. Jake's smirk hardened into a scowl as he stepped closer, blocking her path to the exit. "Not so fast," he said, his tone low but dangerous. His hand rested on the edge of the pool table beside him, knuckles white as if ready to grip something heavy. "You've got some moves for an old lady. What's your story?" Maria didn't answer. Her posture remained calm, but her eyes darted briefly to the corners of the room, taking in the exits and the number of bodies between her and safety. The waitress, Lily, stood frozen near the bar, clutching her tray as if it were a shield. Their eyes met briefly, and Maria could see the worry etched on the young woman's face. Jake leaned closer, his shadow casting over Maria. "Come on now," he coaxed, though his voice was anything but friendly. "A woman like you doesn't just show up out of nowhere and pull off a stunt like that. You've got some secrets, don't you?" The bar had grown eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the low hum of the jukebox and the occasional creak of a chair. A man near the door cleared his throat nervously, but no one dared move. Maria's voice was steady when she finally spoke. "I'm just passing through. Let me go and there won't be any trouble." Jake chuckled darkly. "You think you're in a position to make demands? Lady, you just embarrassed my guy in front of everyone. Trouble's already here." From behind the bar, Lily's voice suddenly cut through the tension. "Jake, just let her leave. She hasn't done anything to you." Her tone was shaky but brave, a small defiance in the face of the domineering man. Jake turned his head sharply toward her, his glare silencing her immediately. "Stay out of this, Lily," he barked. "This ain't your business." Maria's eyes narrowed. "Leave her alone," she said, her tone cold and firm. Jake's attention snapped back to Maria, his expression darkening further. "Oh, you've got guts. I'll give you that," he said, taking another step forward. His gang began to rise from their seats, their movement slow and deliberate, like wolves preparing to encircle their prey. Maria didn't flinch, her stance steady despite the odds against her. She'd been in situations like this before, though it had been years. Still, muscle memory and sharp instincts weren't things you lost easily. Just as Jake reached out as if to grab her, Maria sidestepped quickly, her movement fluid and precise. The motion startled him enough to pause, but his patience was clearly wearing thin. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Maria met his gaze without wavering. "Someone you don't want to mess with," she said quietly. The room held its collective breath. Jake's question hung in the air, unanswered, as Maria remained steadfast. The growing unease in the bar was palpable, and the bikers around her shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to make of the woman who had so effortlessly turned their dominance into a fragile veneer. Jake's patience, however, was nearing its breaking point. "Lady," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "you've got one chance to explain yourself before things get ugly." Maria tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unwavering. She measured her words carefully, knowing that anything she said could escalate the already volatile situation. Finally, she exhaled slowly and spoke. "I was trained to handle situations like this," she began, her voice steady, but low enough to keep others from overhearing. "A long time ago, I worked for people who made sure bad men didn't get away with the things they did. That's all you need to know." The room erupted in murmurs, and Jake froze, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. His gang exchanged uneasy glances, a flicker of doubt creeping into their bravado. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, muttered, "You hear that? She's some kind of cop or something." Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not a cop," she clarified. "But I dealt with people like you, and worse." Jake's grin returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. "So, what are you saying? You're retired now? Out here living the quiet life?" He leaned closer, his tone mocking. "Or maybe you're hiding from something." The accusation sent a ripple of unease through the room. Maria didn't react, but inside she felt a pang of the truth in his words. She had been running, leaving behind a life that had cost her dearly. This wasn't where she wanted to be, but circumstances had a way of catching up. From behind the bar, Lily spoke again, her voice trembling but resolute. "Jake, let her go. You don't know what you're messing with." Jake turned sharply toward her, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "Lily, I told you to stay out of this." But Maria stepped forward, cutting him off. "She's right. Let me leave, and no one gets hurt." Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like he might back down. Then his laughter filled the room, cold and joyless. "You think you can waltz in here, throw my guys around, and walk out like nothing happened? No chance, lady." He waved his hand, and two of his men began to circle Maria, their intentions clear. She noted their movements, her posture shifting ever so slightly into readiness. Before they could act, the door to the bar creaked open. The interruption drew everyone's attention. A group of men entered, their faces unfamiliar, but the sharp glint in their eyes and the way they scanned the room set Maria's instincts on edge. Jake's expression darkened as he recognized them. "Well, well," one of the newcomers said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Jake Thunder. Still playing king of this dump?" Maria's stomach tightened. Whoever these men were, they were dangerous. And judging by Jake's reaction, her simple stop at this bar had just become far more complicated. The room's atmosphere grew heavier as the newcomers stepped inside, their confident strides cutting through the tension like a blade. They were clearly not strangers to Jake, whose posture stiffened as his smirk faltered. Maria observed the exchange quietly, noting the uneasy glances exchanged between Jake's men. "What are you doing here, Marcos?" Jake growled, his voice a mixture of irritation and caution. The leader of the group, a lean man with slicked-back hair and piercing eyes, grinned wolfishly. "Just passing through. Heard some noise. Thought we'd see what the commotion was about." His gaze flicked to Maria, lingering for a moment. "Seems like you've got an interesting guest." Maria remained still, her instincts on high alert. Whoever Marcos and his men were, they exuded an air of menace that surpassed Jake's. It was clear they weren't just here for small talk. "Whatever you want, you're not getting it here," Jake snapped, stepping forward in a show of dominance. But his voice lacked conviction, and the tension between the two groups was palpable. Marcos chuckled. "Relax, Jake. We're not here to take over your little operation. This time." He turned his attention fully to Maria. "But she's intriguing. Who are you, Senora?" Maria didn't respond, her gaze steady and calculating. She didn't owe these men any explanations, and she wasn't about to volunteer information that could make things worse. Still, she could feel the room closing in around her, options narrowing with every passing second. Before Marcos could press further, Lily spoke up. "Leave her alone. She hasn't done anything to you." Marcos looked at the young waitress, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Brave one, aren't you?" He turned back to Maria. "Seems you've made a friend. Not many people stand up to Jake, let alone to me." The comment seemed to embolden Lily. She stepped closer to Maria, her chin lifted despite the tremor in her hands. "Maybe it's time someone did." Maria glanced at Lily, surprised by her courage. There was a strength in the young woman that reminded Maria of herself, long before she'd become hardened by years of dangerous missions and losses. Jake, however, wasn't impressed. "Enough!" he barked, glaring at Marcos. "Take your boys and get out. This is my place." Marcos smirked, clearly enjoying the power shift. "As you wish, Jake. But remember, we're always watching." With a final glance at Maria, he turned and led his group out, their departure leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Jake's anger simmered as he turned his attention back to Maria. "This isn't over," he growled. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, lady. I hope you're ready for what's coming." As Jake stormed off, some of the other patrons began to relax, the immediate danger seemingly dissipating. Lily turned to Maria, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "You shouldn't stay here," Lily said softly. "Jake doesn't let things go, and Marcos, he's worse." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "I know, but I'm not leaving just yet." Lily frowned but didn't argue. "If you're staying, then maybe I can help." The offer surprised Maria. "Why?" "Because," Lily said firmly, "I'm tired of living in fear." For the first time that night, Maria allowed herself a small smile. "All right then, let's get to work." The bar had settled into an uneasy quiet after the departure of Marcos and his men, but Maria knew the calm wouldn't last. Jake's glare as he retreated to the back office had promised retaliation, and Marcos's interest in her had only complicated things further. Trouble was brewing, and Maria's instincts told her it would arrive sooner rather than later. She turned to Lily, who was busy clearing the bar but kept glancing nervously toward the door. "Do you know how many men Jake can call in?" Maria asked. Lily hesitated before answering. "He's got more outside of this place, maybe a dozen more, and with Marcos poking around, it's hard to say. He might try to join forces, or he might just let Jake deal with it and clean up afterward." Maria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We don't have much time. If I'm going to stay and finish this, I need your help." "Finish this?" Lily asked, her eyes widening. "You're not seriously planning to face them?" "I don't have a choice," Maria said firmly. "Jake won't stop, and Marcos is too interested. If I run now, they'll come after me, and you'll be stuck here dealing with whatever fallout they leave behind." Lily swallowed hard, but her jaw set with determination. "What do you need me to do?" Maria's lips curved into a faint smile. "First, we make sure we're ready for them." For the next few hours, the bar transformed under Maria's guidance. She moved with a precision and focus that fascinated Lily, her years of training apparent in every detail. Tables and chairs were rearranged to create obstacles, while the lighting was adjusted to cast deep shadows across the room. Bottles and tools from the bar were repurposed, turning everyday objects into potential weapons or distractions. Maria showed Lily how to secure the doors and windows, leaving only a few strategic points open to funnel attackers into predictable positions. The young waitress worked quickly, her initial fear giving way to a growing sense of purpose. As they worked, Maria spoke softly, explaining her decisions and teaching Lily techniques to defend herself. "It's not about strength," Maria said, demonstrating a disarming move with a pool cue. "It's about precision and timing. Use their momentum against them." Lily practiced the move a few times, her confidence visibly growing. "Were you always this good?" she asked, glancing at Maria. Maria paused, her gaze distant for a moment. "No, it took years, and mistakes." She met Lily's eyes again. "But you don't have years. You have now, and that's enough." By the time they finished, the bar felt like a fortress, though Lily couldn't shake the nerves twisting in her stomach. She looked at Maria, who was inspecting the final adjustments. "Do you really think this will work?" "It has to," Maria replied simply. She glanced toward the door, her expression steeled. "They'll come soon, and when they do, we'll be ready." The night descended heavily, its oppressive silence broken only by the faint rustle of wind against the bar's boarded-up windows. Maria stood by the door, her ear tuned to the distant rumble of approaching engines. Beside her, Lily shifted nervously, clutching a pool cue Maria had handed her earlier. "They're here," Maria said quietly, her voice calm but firm. She motioned for Lily to stay behind the bar and took her position near one of the strategic points they had prepared. The first wave arrived with the roar of motorcycles cutting through the stillness. Lights from the bikes slashed through the dark as Jake's men parked just outside the building. Their heavy boots thudded against the gravel as they dismounted, the sound growing louder as they approached the door. Jake's unmistakable voice carried above the rest. "Maria!" he shouted, banging on the door with a fist. "You've had your fun. Come out now, and maybe I won't hurt you too bad." Maria didn't reply, her body tense but poised. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her focus. From her position, she had a clear line of sight to the entrance, but she waited, letting Jake make the first move. When no response came, Jake barked orders to his men. "Kick it in!" The door burst open, wood splintering as a burly man shouldered his way inside. He was met with immediate resistance. A carefully placed table toppled over, knocking him off balance. Before he could recover, Maria stepped forward, disarming him with a swift, precise movement and sending him sprawling to the ground. Chaos erupted as more men poured into the bar. Maria moved like a shadow, using the obstacles she and Lily had set up to her advantage. One man stumbled over an overturned chair, only to find himself disarmed and incapacitated before he could react. Another lunged at Maria, but she sidestepped smoothly, sending him crashing into the bar. Lily watched from behind her cover, her heart pounding. She clutched the pool cue tightly, her breath shallow as the room filled with grunts and shouts. One of Jake's men noticed her and began to approach, his intentions clear. Summoning her courage, Lily stepped forward and swung the cue with all her might. The sound of the impact echoed through the bar, and the man crumpled to the ground. Maria glanced at Lily, a flicker of approval in her eyes, before turning her attention back to the remaining attackers. The fight continued, the carefully laid traps giving Maria the upper hand. She moved with an efficiency that left the bikers scrambling, their numbers dwindling with every calculated strike. Jake, still outside, shouted angrily as he watched his men falter. He stormed toward the entrance, his frustration boiling over. "Enough of this! I'll handle her myself!" Maria heard him coming and prepared for the confrontation. She could sense that the fight was far from over, but she also knew they had held their ground for now. Lily, emboldened by her small victory, stepped closer, ready to stand beside Maria. As Jake stepped into the bar, his towering presence filling the room, Maria straightened, her gaze locking with his. The first assault had been repelled, but the real battle was just beginning. Maria's body was tense as Jake strode into the bar, his boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor. The scattered remnants of his crew groaned on the ground or stumbled toward the door, defeated and battered. Jake's eyes swept over the scene, narrowing as he took in the overturned tables, unconscious men, and Maria standing tall amid the wreckage. "Well, you've had your fun," he sneered, cracking his knuckles. "But playtime's over." Maria shifted her stance subtly, preparing for his attack. Behind the bar, Lily clutched her pool cue, her hands trembling but ready. Maria glanced at her briefly, silently telling her to stay out of what was coming next. Jake lunged, his movement surprisingly quick for a man of his size. Maria dodged his first swing, her training taking over as she calculated his rhythm. He swung again, this time with more force, and Maria sidestepped, using a chair to block his path. But Jake was relentless, smashing through the obstacle and driving Maria back toward the corner. The fight was brutal, Jake relying on sheer power, while Maria countered with speed and precision. Each blow she landed seemed only to fuel his anger, and she quickly realized that disarming him wasn't going to be enough. He was stronger, and the small confines of the bar limited her ability to maneuver. Suddenly, two of Jake's men, who had been lying in wait, sprang from the shadows. Maria tried to fend them off, her movements a blur as she disarmed one and incapacitated the other, but the distraction gave Jake an opening. He grabbed her from behind, his massive arm locking around her torso. Maria struggled, twisting and kicking, but Jake's grip was unyielding. He laughed, the sound triumphant and cruel. "You're not as tough as you think," he snarled, dragging her toward the door. "Maria!" Lily cried, stepping out from behind the bar. She started forward, but Jake glared at her. "Stay back, girl," he barked. "Unless you want to join her." Lily froze, her fear rooting her to the spot. Maria caught her eye and gave a subtle shake of her head, a silent command to stay safe. With a heavy heart, Lily retreated, helpless to stop what was happening. Outside, Jake's remaining men had regrouped, their bruised and battered faces lighting up with grim satisfaction as Jake dragged Maria into the open air. He shoved her roughly into the back of a truck, binding her hands with a length of rope. "We're taking a little trip," Jake said, his voice filled with malice. "There are some people who'll pay good money to see you suffer." Maria remained silent, her sharp mind racing as she assessed her situation. Jake's men climbed into the truck, and the vehicle roared to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped off down the deserted road. Back at the bar, Lily stood in the wreckage, her hands clenched into fists. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago was now replaced by something stronger, a burning determination. Maria had risked everything to protect her, and Lily wasn't about to let her face this alone. She grabbed a set of keys from behind the bar, her resolve firm. "Hang on, Maria," she whispered to herself. "I'm coming for you." Chaos erupted as more men poured into the bar. Maria moved like a shadow, using the obstacles she and Lily had set up to her advantage. One man stumbled over an overturned chair, only to find himself disarmed and incapacitated before he could react. Another lunged at Maria, but she sidestepped smoothly, sending him crashing into the bar. Lily watched from behind her cover, her heart pounding. She clutched the pool cue tightly, her breath shallow as the room filled with grunts and shouts. One of Jake's men noticed her and began to approach, his intentions clear. Summoning her courage, Lily stepped forward and swung the cue with all her might. The sound of the impact echoed through the bar, and the man crumpled to the ground. Maria glanced at Lily, a flicker of approval in her eyes, before turning her attention back to the remaining attackers. The fight continued, the carefully laid traps giving Maria the upper hand. She moved with an efficiency that left the bikers scrambling, their numbers dwindling with every calculated strike. Jake, still outside, shouted angrily as he watched his men falter. He stormed toward the entrance, his frustration boiling over. "Enough of this! I'll handle her myself!" Maria heard him coming and prepared for the confrontation. She could sense that the fight was far from over, but she also knew they had held their ground for now. Lily, emboldened by her small victory, stepped closer, ready to stand beside Maria. As Jake stepped into the bar, his towering presence filling the room, Maria straightened, her gaze locking with his. The first assault had been repelled, but the real battle was just beginning. Maria's body was tense as Jake strode into the bar, his boots echoing ominously on the wooden floor. The scattered remnants of his crew groaned on the ground or stumbled toward the door, defeated and battered. Jake's eyes swept over the scene, narrowing as he took in the overturned tables, unconscious men, and Maria standing tall amid the wreckage. "Well, you've had your fun," he sneered, cracking his knuckles. "But playtime's over." Maria shifted her stance subtly, preparing for his attack. Behind the bar, Lily clutched her pool cue, her hands trembling but ready. Maria glanced at her briefly, silently telling her to stay out of what was coming next. Jake lunged, his movement surprisingly quick for a man of his size. Maria dodged his first swing, her training taking over as she calculated his rhythm. He swung again, this time with more force, and Maria sidestepped, using a chair to block his path. But Jake was relentless, smashing through the obstacle and driving Maria back toward the corner. The fight was brutal, Jake relying on sheer power, while Maria countered with speed and precision. Each blow she landed seemed only to fuel his anger, and she quickly realized that disarming him wasn't going to be enough. He was stronger, and the small confines of the bar limited her ability to maneuver. Suddenly, two of Jake's men, who had been lying in wait, sprang from the shadows. Maria tried to fend them off, her movements a blur as she disarmed one and incapacitated the other, but the distraction gave Jake an opening. He grabbed her from behind, his massive arm locking around her torso. Maria struggled, twisting and kicking, but Jake's grip was unyielding. He laughed, the sound triumphant and cruel. "You're not as tough as you think," he snarled, dragging her toward the door. "Maria!" Lily cried, stepping out from behind the bar. She started forward, but Jake glared at her. "Stay back, girl," he barked. "Unless you want to join her." Lily froze, her fear rooting her to the spot. Maria caught her eye and gave a subtle shake of her head, a silent command to stay safe. With a heavy heart, Lily retreated, helpless to stop what was happening. Outside, Jake's remaining men had regrouped, their bruised and battered faces lighting up with grim satisfaction as Jake dragged Maria into the open air. He shoved her roughly into the back of a truck, binding her hands with a length of rope. "We're taking a little trip," Jake said, his voice filled with malice. "There are some people who'll pay good money to see you suffer." Maria remained silent, her sharp mind racing as she assessed her situation. Jake's men climbed into the truck, and the vehicle roared to life, its headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped off down the deserted road. Back at the bar, Lily stood in the wreckage, her hands clenched into fists. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago was now replaced by something stronger, a burning determination. Maria had risked everything to protect her, and Lily wasn't about to let her face this alone. She grabbed a set of keys from behind the bar, her resolve firm. "Hang on, Maria," she whispered to herself. "I'm coming for you." Lily didn't respond, but Maria could see the small nod of acknowledgement. There was no time to waste. They had to keep moving. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. Maria's thoughts flickered back to the bar, to the chaos they had left behind. The fight hadn't been easy, and neither was what lay ahead. She knew that Jake wouldn't stop until he had exacted his revenge, and that made it all the more urgent that they find a way to finish this, once and for all. Lily's motorcycle swerved slightly, forcing Maria to steady herself. "Are you okay?" Maria asked. "I'm fine," Lily answered, her voice steady. "Just need to get us somewhere safe." Maria thought for a moment, her gaze scanning the road ahead. There was an old gas station coming into view, barely lit but standing as an oasis in the desert. It could be a place to rest, a place to regroup, but more importantly, it could be a place to prepare. "Pull in there," Maria said, pointing toward the gas station. Lily nodded and made a sharp turn, guiding the motorcycle into the small, rundown lot. The place was deserted, its single flickering light casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. The building looked abandoned, but it would have to do. They needed a moment to catch their breath, to plan. Maria dismounted quickly, surveying their surroundings as Lily secured the bike. They moved inside, the door creaking as it opened. The gas station's interior was dimly lit by old fluorescent lights. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of stale coffee lingered from the pot that had long since gone cold. Lily went to the counter and grabbed a few supplies, some water, canned food, and a few other essentials. Maria watched her, taking a moment to appreciate the young woman's calmness under pressure. She'd come a long way from the scared waitress who had hesitated when Jake first threatened her. "So, what now?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but filled with purpose. Maria turned, her gaze meeting Lily's. "Now we prepare. Jake will come. We have to be ready for whatever he throws at us." Lily nodded, her jaw set. "I won't back down." Maria smiled faintly, moved by the conviction in her voice. She had come to rely on Lily's strength, and now she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, trusting someone else. "Neither will I." But as they spoke, a soft noise interrupted their conversation, the faint sound of a car pulling into the lot. Maria's instincts kicked in, her body tensing. She motioned for Lily to stay low, and they both crouched behind the counter, waiting. A figure emerged from the car, the heavy thud of boots on the gravel, unmistakable. Maria's hand instinctively reached for a makeshift weapon, an old crowbar lying nearby. But then a voice broke the silence, familiar and unexpected. "Maria!" She froze, her breath catching. The voice belonged to someone she hadn't heard from in years. Slowly, she stood up and moved toward the door. The figure stepped into the weak light, revealing a man in his early 40s, his face weathered but unmistakable. "Antonio?" Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. She blinked, unable to fully process the sight of him. Antonio stepped closer, a hesitant smile on his face. "I thought it was you." Maria's heart skipped. Antonio had been a close ally back in her former life, a partner who had helped her through some of the darkest times. After the mission that had shattered her world, he had disappeared without a trace. Maria had thought he was dead, or worse. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. "I've been tracking Jake," Antonio replied, his expression serious. "I know what he's after, and I know you're in the middle of it. I've been keeping an eye on things, waiting for the right moment to come." Lily, still behind the counter, peeked over at them. "Who is he?" Maria looked back at her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "He's someone I can trust." Antonio moved forward, his eyes scanning the room. "I've been watching Jake's movements. He's not as unstoppable as he thinks. We can end this." Maria's mind raced. The end was finally in sight, but it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming everything that had been lost. Her past, her peace, and perhaps even a future. Lily stepped forward, her voice firm. "What do we need to do?" Maria looked at the two of them, Antonio, who had come back when she needed him most, and Lily, whose courage had exceeded her expectations. For the first time in years, Maria felt ready for what was coming. They had the strength, the resolve, and now, the plan. "Now," Maria said, her voice resolute, "we take the fight to them." As the three of them made their final preparations, the weight of the past seemed to lift ever so slightly. It wasn't the end they had expected, but it was a new beginning. Together, they would face the storm. And this time, they wouldn't just survive, they would fight to win. The story of Maria and Lily teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to face it head-on, even when the odds seem impossible. Maria could have run, could have hidden from the past that haunted her, but instead, she chose to fight, to protect those who needed her most. In the end, it's not the battles we fight that define us, but the strength we summon when everything is on the line. How would you have acted in Maria's place? Would you have stood up to the darkness, or would fear have held you back? Click the video on the screen to continue your journey of self-discovery. As you reflect on Maria's story, ask yourself, what would it take for you to embrace your inner strength? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire you to take action in your own life. Thank you for watching, and remember, your journey is just beginning.